I was like, yo, we have to talk about how do we, number one, and I feel like it starts in a very personal way. How do we get the courage to finally share our story? Right. And it could be a personal story. Again, it could be a professional brand story, whatever it is. But rather than rushing to the quick professional things or the professional terms that everybody talks about, yo, how do we muscle up the courage to say, okay, I know that stuff is important,
Right.
but let me tell you the truth that I stand on. Let me kind of muscle up the courage to just put myself out there and say, why is it that I'm choosing to stand for this type of information or for these types of principles or for this way of doing things, right? What's that story? So I want to start there. And then I want us to kind of talk a little bit about maybe some best practices or guide the people who are tuning in. If you're launching a brand, have launched a brand, haven't really captivated or put your story out there to the marketplace, how do you maybe pull your story together in a way that makes sense so people who that are, tuning in, they're rocking with it, they're getting an understanding of what it's about. So yeah, that's how it came about, man. So I was curious, like, yo, how do we get and help people to muscle up the courage to at first, just number one, stand up and turn the camera on and start sharing their story a little bit?
So I'll say, first and foremost, if you're watching this live or even in the replay, if you struggle with telling your story, type 1, right? Type 1. If you struggle with telling your story online, type 2. If you're like, Nicky and Moose, we're good. Like, I could tell my story all day. Let me know, right? And it really, it's funny. I was talking about this yesterday, actually. So this is really fresh, but it's hard to instantly think about that there is a really deeper meaning to why you have to tell your story, right? You don't instantly get there. Like, we eventually know that. But when we're finally creating brands and we understand we have to be out there a little bit more, it goes more towards feeling comfortable with yourself and understanding who you are first and foremost. Like, this is where possibly talking in front of the mirror, though that may seem a little bit funny, right? A little bit uncomfortable. What is the point of that, right? But I always say it's really you and the phone. It's you and the camera. It's really not anybody else. And the only way you can feel comfortable telling your story, especially from an online standpoint, is feeling comfortable talking to yourself. There's no other way, right? If you're not comfortable looking in the mirror and saying who you are, giving your perspective on things, being a little bit vulnerable and transparent, it's going to be hard to press publish. It's going to be hard to press live, right? It starts with your room. It starts with your mirror. And it starts with really self-reflecting who you are and what you really want to be, you want to put out to the world. When that gets done, then we could talk about the whole, all right, this is done for a bigger purpose. This is bigger than me. I'm supposed to tell this story because this is supposed to help others and get them to new levels. Absolutely. That's the very cliche thing. But if we don't know how to speak to ourselves, we can't talk to the phone. Because that's the only one we're talking to is the phone. We're not talking to anybody else, really. They just happen to see it.
Right. Yeah, no, that's so real, because I remember when I first started, like anything related to talking to the phone, I realized that the practice itself, and by the way, and the beautiful thing is, a shout out to Game Changers and Kent, to CJ and everyone on that end, because when I started in that program. And one of the things that they told us to do was make a 10-minute video about your story publish it to YouTube unlisted. So like that's a little secret weapon that YouTube has as a feature, that you can publish something online. You're still going through all of the steps that you normally would go through when you have to publish content. But if you're a little bit afraid, this is your first time, you need somewhere to practice, and you don't want to maybe go through the embarrassment or just simply put it out there if it's not your best work yet, which, by the way, just as a side note, if that is something that you're thinking about, you will never feel like it's your best work. Today, today, 5, 6, 7 years later, I'm like, damn, that sucked. That was pretty bad. I could have done better. Like every time. I don't know that I've ever done something I'm like, yeah, wow, that was the best I could have ever done. I always feel like I could do better. So just a reminder to you listening, man, like you're always going to feel that. And it's simply because you care. Like that's normal. But don't let that reason or that become an excuse in your mind to say, oh yeah, see, that's why I shouldn't be putting my stuff out. You see, that's why I'm not going to share my story or I'm not going to put it out online. But back to my original point, we were posting it unlisted. So we were going through all the motions of what it takes to put it out online, but not having to respond to the social pressure. The best part about that, though, and I think that's a little bit of what you're speaking to, it helped me organize my thoughts and my story as to what points do I really want to share. Because especially when you're telling someone like, hey, gain the courage to tell your personal story, you start to think like, well, okay, I've been alive for about 36. So this happened to me at 2. And then, it's like, bro, we don't want the chronological order of what happened in your life story. We want the abbreviated version of it. So when you start to think about, okay, what are the most impactful events or moments in my life that have shaped who I am, that have shaped my belief system and my outlook on the world and the things that I want to speak to, it helps to figure out, and you should be thinking about as you're going through this process, no matter how much you've told your story, by the way, I think this is always great practice. Go back through and really think about what events in my life, what experiences shaped my belief system to be as strong about the things that I care about today throughout that story. So those are usually the 1, 2, or 3 things that you'll start, hitting on to speak about and sharing. Now, the second piece, and this is where I'd like for you to kind of add some pieces in it too, Nix, which is how do you, when you develop that muscle or develop that courage, how do you now start sharing the story with other people in mind? Because, of course, we believe on the importance of community. A lot of what we do is built around community. There's a community element in almost everything that we do. So when you think about it from a scientific standpoint, a psychology standpoint, at the end of the day, people connect with people, right? Like it's something about the person that you're attracted or connected to. You like the way they think, you like the way they talk, you like the way they dress. There's something that you're attracted to that says, oh, I want to tune in a little bit more. So you can't get to community or building a community if you don't ever start at the first level of saying, okay, how do I start sharing in a way where my story allows people to see themselves in what I'm saying, right? It's almost like a movie. And I've always joked around. I said, humans are the most selfish people on planet Earth, because whenever they're watching a movie, they're not looking at the actor and saying, wow, Denzel is so sweet. They're looking at Denzel and they're thinking about, how would I respond in Denzel's shoes? Like, you're comparing yourself to the character. Yeah. And it's part of storytelling. You have to be able to get to a point where you tell your story and you're allowing others to see themselves in your experience. So talk about maybe just some of the ways to connect to people. Because the crazy thing is, like, I watch your lives and I'm like, you do a phenomenal job of that, because you really talk to the biggest insecurities or worries that people have about content and social media. That is it. I feel like every single version of your live that you've been doing for 3, 4, 5 years is literally a remix of those 2 things. And it's like people connect with it. And now you look up, you got nearly 100 people on, or 100 plus. And it's because of that. So talk about just like how you're able to bring people's desires or worries into your content so that they're like, I connect with Nicky. I want to listen. Even if I listen to the first 3, 4, 5, 4 lives she did this week, I'm still tapping in.
it goes with not speaking about you and speaking about their problems and their pain points, right? It's even if we've dealt with it, we can't lead with that first. And sometimes, like, because we're speaking, some of us are speaking on the issues or the pain points that we had, and that's how we're helping and creating a brand. We can't lead with that because the second it sounds like we're talking about ourselves, they're checked out.
Yeah.
Right? So this is where you have to understand when you're speaking about your story, what part of the story helps solves a pain point in your audience. And this is understanding, once again, understanding your audience and understanding their pain points and what they need based off being like watching your content and watching your lives and subscribing to the podcast and things like that. Why are they here? And speak on why are they here. Then you can add more of like your experience and things like that. Talk a little bit more about you after that point. But they need to know first and foremost, you're there for them and you're speaking to them, not speaking, trying to sound like I'm bigger than thou and I've done it and I'm here to tell you what I did. Like you actually belittle people by speaking about you all the time.
Yeah.
You sound self-centered. So it really goes off leading off by talking to them, doing certain trigger words that is only for your audience and speaking to them like, okay, you may be feeling this way. You may have went through this. You may have had a bad day. And if you have, this is where those engagement questions come in. Yo, let us know in the comments. Type in an emoji, some like that. Getting them engaged, and you're like, okay, this is for me. And then going into the story a little bit more, and that normally helps because you just got to lead with the audience first.